We'll get started here in a few minutes. We'll give everybody a couple more minutes to get on and then we'll get going for this evening. There. Okay, I think we'll get started. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Landscaping webinar. This is the last of 3 sessions. My name is Janet, and I will again be your host for tonight's webinar. For those of you who have not attended before, and as a reminder for everyone, we have a couple of items before we get started. Closed captioning is enabled and can be turned on or off with the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Also during the sessions, everyone will be muted. There'll be time for questions at the end of both sessions this evening. To ask a question, please type into the Q&A box and we will answer as many questions as we can during the time allotted. If you have additional questions, please contact your local extension office. Just to let you know, we will post the link to the handouts in the chat box. We will hope you find them useful. Please reply in the chat box if you have any questions. There'll be about 5 minutes between this evening's 2 sessions to allow time for the second presenter to set up. So let's get started. The first session tonight is mulch and composting with Joanne Carlson and Catherine Burke. Joanne will be doing a presentation, which will be followed by a sheet composting demonstration by Catherine Burke. Let me introduce them. Joanne became a master gardener and a compost specialist in 2008. She started composting kitchen and garden waste as an ecological aware undergraduate at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and maintained small patio or balcony container gardens while a graduate student in pharmacology at George Washington University and a postdoc at UC San Diego. After moving to Eugene 31 years ago, she was finally able to greatly expand her gardening and composting activities. Her home is on the highest point in Eugene, had no appreciable soil when it was completed in 2005. So she learned to create it with compost and mulch. Catherine Burke has been a master gardener since 2004. Besides being a sustainable landscape specialist, she is a compost specialist. Catherine really took an interest in vegetable gardening and composting when she was a college student at Oregon State University 50 years ago. She developed a love of all trees, shrubs, and perennials when she and her husband bought property in Cottage Grove almost 30 years ago. She has a 4-bin cold composting system. So Joanne will be starting first, and then we'll take a couple seconds for Catherine to set up her little demo, but let's welcome Joanne.
Thank you, Jan, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We were kind of hoping we would have the same kind of weather we had here yesterday, but it's a little chilly, but it's not raining at the moment, so we thought we'd do this outside. We'll be talking about using a mulch and compost in your sustainable landscape. Go ahead, next, Jan. In this class, you're going to learn about using the compost and the mulch, and we'll go through them separately and then see how they can be used together. Next. Very importantly, now we're coming off of observing Earth Day just a few days ago, and we want to keep that going. It's very, very important to divert organic waste materials from the landfill and conserve natural resources. We're going to be creating healthier soils and using techniques that protect the health of animals and people while reducing the impact on the environment. And so these are important techniques that all of us can use, and you can use it in ways that suit you and work best for you. And we're going to give you lots of ideas for that. Next. Okay, I'm not going to read all these slides, but I am going to start out by reading this one. So mulch, in definition, is any organic or non-organic material used to cover the soil. So it covers the soil, goes on top, which is used to inhibit the growth of weeds, conserve soil moisture, moderate soil temperature, protect plant roots, and protect the soil surface. Compost is the end product of the decomposition of organic material by micro and macroorganisms. Quality compost is biologically alive with millions of organisms that convert organic material such as grass, leaves, manure, wood, and food waste into a high quality soil amendment. And we'll show you how to do that. That's part of what the demo is all about, and show you, give you lots and lots of examples on how compost can be used. Next. Okay, so we've all got garden debris, we've got kitchen stuff, scraps that we're, we're trying to keep things out of the landfill. One thing when you're talking about kitchen waste, you're making a salad or you're, chopping up veggies for your dinner, and you're going to have, some little odds and ends and things that you're not going to eat. And rather than putting them in the landfill, you can compost them if you'd like. That's the picture on the right is an earth machine. The one on the left is a curbside bin that you put out every 2 weeks. Here in Eugene, our local company picks up every 2 weeks. And one thing they started a couple of years ago was that you can now add that kitchen waste to that bin if you want. If you don't have room, maybe you live in an apartment or something. But rather than putting it in your trash and heading to the landfill and contributing to greenhouse gases, therefore, you can divert it from that if you want to do that. Here in Eugene, we also have the added advantage where you can even put things like bones and other kind of oils, cheese, things like that that you might be throwing out into that curbside bin. But don't put those in your backyard. And we'll talk more about that later. And really keep in mind that 40% of the food in this country is wasted, and 97% of that is currently going to the landfill. So anything you can do to keep your kitchen waste out of the landfill is going to help with that. And when you're working in your garden, well, then you're going to have, you're going to be pruning and doing things like that. Where are you going to put that? Don't put it in the landfill. You could put it in that curbside bin. You can compost it. So really try to keep things out of the landfill. Next. Okay, so first I'm going to be talking about mulching. And so mulching is a process of applying a protective covering to the soil surfaces. As I said, there's lots of different ways to mulch. There's lots of different materials that you can use for mulching. And there are living mulches such as ground covers. Those are plants that you plant on your soil surface to keep weeds, to suppress weeds from growing and keep soil compaction from happening and things like that. There's lots of examples of native and there's non-native ground covers too. Extension has lists of these. I've got several here. I have one called Point Raised Ceanothus that does real well. So you want to find something that's suited to your particular site. I get a lot of sun here. I have a southern exposure. That's Spencer Butte behind me. And we get a lot of sun and I don't want to water. And so I've chosen Kinnicknick and Cotoneaster and the Point Raised Ceanothus are some of the ones that I use. But check with your extension if you are looking for other suggestions and things that you could use. Cover crops are something that you can sow in your vegetable garden in the off season or in a bed that you're not using to help out with weed suppression, adding nitrogen to your soil, aerating your soil, things like that. And again, Extension has lots of information on choices of cover crops that you can use. So those are living mulches, ground covers and cover crops. There are also non-organic mulches, such as rock, plastic, recycled tires even that you can use. And for some sites, those may be appropriate too. So one thing that we've done is right next to our house, we're using rock because we want to keep the fire danger down rather than using something like wood chips. So yeah, look at your site and think about what sorts of what you would want to use. Next. Okay, so what are the advantages of mulching? Why would we do this? Mulching moderates your soil temperature, keeping the soil warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. It moderates soil moisture so that in summer, if you have a nice mulched area, it's going to stay moister and not dry out so much. In the winter, it keeps it from getting overly soggy, muddy. Also reduces soil erosion and having all that runoff happening, reduces soil compaction when the rain is just pattering, coming down on bare soil. It's going to compact it, make it hard for things to grow, except weeds. They always seem to find a way. And so, yes, it inhibits weeds. This picture shows some wood chips and how they're all kind of knit together. And as they're breaking down, fungus comes in and starts kind of knitting it together. And that's what the picture on the bottom shows, is a fungal filament kind of holding it all together and keeping those, but water can still get through. Next. Okay, more on the benefits of mulch. It improves the soil structure as it breaks down, increases the organic matter and nutrient levels in the soil. It builds the soil levels as it decays, which improves the drainage for your plants too, as the soil level is raised. Helps to prevent erosion and water runoff. And when we've done this seminar in the past, we have done point systems where you can go through your yard and give yourself points for different things. And so that's what's on the bottom of these slides. And so the more sustainable landscaping practices that you employ, the more points you get. This also shows, the slide shows mushrooms growing out of wood chips. And that's because the wood chips are breaking down, but the fungus is helping break them down, and then the mushrooms are erupting. They only last a couple of days, and they're pretty cool looking. You can see what you find in your wood chips that are being used for mulch. Next. Okay, how much mulch and where? You can put it around your tree roots and shrubs. You can put it on your planting beds. One thing to keep in mind is you want to leave 3 inches of space between a tree trunk and the mulch. And that is because if it gets too wet with that mulch sitting next to it, it can actually rot the tree. Also, little creatures like voles can get kind of hide as they travel around underneath that mulch and nibble at the base of the tree. So 3 inches is a pretty good rule of thumb, how much mulch to put on. If you're really going for some weed suppression area, maybe you're trying to rehabilitate, you can go a lot deeper. I mean, you can go like 10 inches of wood chips, and that can rehab the soil. But I'm not recommending anybody. I'm not suggesting you want to go out and do that. It takes an awful lot of material. But yeah, think about what your goal is, and how much weeds you need to suppress. Next. Oh, one thing you don't have to go back, Jan, but I wanted to mention is this idea of a self-mulching area that was noted at the bottom of that. And that's the idea of just kind of letting the leaves stay where they are and naturally mulch into the ground. And we do an awful lot of that here. One, because I'm lazy, and 2, because it doesn't matter. I don't have a huge manicured yard. But more and more, there's this little saying where people are saying, leave the leaves. You don't have to clean everything up. You don't have to be out there with your blower. You don't even have to be out there with your rake, but think about your goals. And it is okay to let in some places, the leaves just go ahead and decay. Okay, when to mulch and why? In general, you can mulch anytime. There's different goals. And you don't have to mulch 4 times a year, but you can, and you probably will be in different areas, doing one area one time and one area another. In the spring, you want to mulch the new plants. So as we're getting ready to plant our veggie gardens, we can put mulch around them to protect against weeds, protect the roots, and conserve the moisture. In the summer, again, the mulch is going to conserve water, cool the soil, reduce weed growth, and release nutrients as the mulch breaks down. Next. And this picture just says, try to do it at least once a year. Take a look and see if you're using wood chips, they're not going to break down as rapidly as something like leaves, but you want to keep that 2 to 3 inch depth, and once a year is a pretty good rule of thumb for most things. Next. There are a lot of organic resources for things that you can use for mulch. Many of them are available in the community. The extension has lists of different resources for getting some of these things, but you want to check and make sure that they're still available in various places. And Catherine's going to give you lots of examples in the demo of these different things, but you can use newspaper and cardboard as a mulch. Not the most attractive. You're just going to have it sitting there. You're probably going to want to put something on top of it. Grass clippings, you can use those. In fact, when you're mowing your lawn, you can just let those grass clippings mulch right into the lawn. Straw, not hay. You don't want anything with seeds to be sprouting. Even coffee bags, those burlap sacks that the coffee roasters get the coffee beans in, those can be used, and you'll see that in the demo. Coffee grounds are a good source using in mulch and in compost too. And good old Barco mulch is wood chips, or you can get wood chips from a tree trimmer. Next. This shows some of what the coffee sacks look like in this example. They've just put them down around a post, and there's kind of like a first layer thing. Next. Here are pine needles, and those are, I think, more attractive than just having the coffee sacks, and they break down very slowly. They tend to be rather acidic, and so if you have an area that has some plants that are more acid loving, like rhodies or blueberries, that can be a good choice to use as a mulch around those. Next. Okay, leaves. Leaves are a really good and very available resource that we have a lot of here. In Eugene, we have a really nice program where you can put if you're living in the city, you can put your leaves that you rake up into the street carefully. Don't be blocking the bike lanes and things like that in the fall. But and then the city will come by and pick them up, and you can have them delivered to your house too. You go on the City of Eugene website and they will deliver them. And I've got some big piles down the hill here, and we participate in that program. But use your own leaves too. Just depends how much you need. Arborists often have wood chips and all you need to do sometimes is just ask them, hey, what are you gonna do with those wood chips? And they may be happy for maybe a small fee to deliver them to your house. And you can make or purchase compost, which can be used as a mulch as well. Next. Okay, so you can, this is a silly little thing here, rake your own leaves or buy them for $10 a bag, but I think you can just use your own, whatever you want. Leaves are very useful. Next. Okay, so some examples of the non-organic kinds of mulches or more permanent mulches would be things like stone, rock, gravel, which are effective in pathways for preventing weeds. You may want to put a geotextile underneath if you're doing a path to suppress the weeds, because they will grow in rocks. This is, I don't know if you can see it, it's called quarter 10, and it's very small little gravel. It's crushed gravel, and it's really good in paths. We have it on a lot of our paths around here. So that is one example. Places you might want to put that, in your paths. Plastic mulch, I think that's not used so much these days with the advent of better things, these porous synthetic fabrics. But people would put the black plastic down, and it suppresses weeds. Also, keeps any soil that's in the soil, keeps the soil moist. That's already moist, but nothing really penetrates, except that after a few years it starts breaking down, and then you have pieces of plastic everywhere, but then water's getting in. But there are some applications where you might want to use that, but keep an eye on whether it's breaking down or not. And if it is breaking down, get it out of there, because it's just going to get worse. Geotextiles, these are porous synthetic fabrics that allow water, air, and nutrients to pass. Doesn't let everything get through, but it is a good choice for some areas. And we have used it here for on various paths with the quarter 10 rock on top of it. Next. Okay, and so here's just an example of rock of different sizes. In the foreground is the quarter 10, and it's wet, so it looks kind of nice and shiny, and then some bigger river rock in the back. And so you don't have bare soil there. It's covered up, and there's actually some plants that have been planted there that are growing out of it. Next. Okay, this is an example of a plastic mulch, and this is this red plastic that it's very, very thin, and it can be used for planting around your tomatoes, and it actually has been shown it can increase your yield and of your tomatoes by like 20%, and also decrease the ripening time of the tomato. So that would be the application for this. You want to cut holes for your little plants, and you also want to have your drip irrigation underneath it, because the water is not going to get through if you want to do this. And the thing to keep in mind is, because it is so thin, it's going to tear easily. You need to be careful around it, and it will break down after a season or so. But that is a example of a plastic mulch. Next. Okay, so we're one of the goals of this, and not just keeping stuff out of the landfill, but we're trying to build healthy soil so we can have healthy plants. And so now I'm switching into talking about compost. And that's fine, you can go ahead. All soils respond to organic matter, and you basically want to use both compost and mulch if you can. Many ways to compost. You are going to get a really great demonstration of one way to compost tonight in just a few minutes. But I'm going to show you lots of examples, and you can be creative, and these things might kind of spark your imagination. There are above compost piles and bins, like we showed you at the very beginning, that earth machine, that black plastic thing. Worm bin composting is an option. There's an upcoming worm bin workshop at the Lane County Extension coming up on May 7th, I believe. And that's a good choice for, I think for people that live in smaller places, maybe don't have a lot of kitchen veg or a big yard or anything. My earth machine in my backyard actually has kind of turned into a worm bin. I don't ever take anything out of it because there's so many worms, and they're just happy. Next. Sheet mulch compost. That's what you're going to see. And that is layers of, it's also known as lasagna, because there's layers of carbon-rich materials layered with nitrogen-rich layers, kind of one on top of the other, and then it all breaks down. So that's called sheet mulch or lasagna composting. Next. And then the in situ with post-hole composting, where you just dig a hole and bury it. And that's super easy if you don't have a lot of stuff and you don't mind digging holes all the time. But it is an option, and you can do it in your garden, where you're probably have good loose soil anyway. And then if you just like through the winter, you can just take a little bucket and stick it in the garden bed, just cover it back up again. Next. Yeah, choose what works best for you. You can do, one thing, you can do two things, you can do a zillion things, and it will evolve with time as you see what works for you. Next. Here's some examples of backyard compost bins. The one on the left is real simple. It is a plastic cylinder with holes punched in it. It's open at the bottom, it's open on the top, and it kind of contains stuff. For that one, you can see things are kind of spilling out the bottom. But it's real easy to, when it comes time to mix it or harvest it, all you have to do is lift that plastic cylinder off. The one on the right is much more elaborate. It's a 2-bin system made out of wood and with hinged doors on it. And so that's a very nice system if you have the resources to build something like that, or purchase something like that. Next. Here's a 4-bin system built into a hillside with a deck next to it. So that's an option. You have to think, where am I going to put it? Well, hey, I've got this hillside here and there's nothing else done. So you could do something like that. That's the choice. Next. Here is a system where you can see there are these panels on the front that they actually slide in and out, and that makes it easy to get your materials in and out of it, rather than just trying to put everything in on the top, and then when comes time to turn the compost, mix everything up, or harvest it, it's nice to be able to just take the front of it off like that. Next. These are old dog kennels that were turned into compost bins. So these are, if you have a large lot and lots of materials, you may want to consider something of this size, but think about, how much stuff you have to compost and how many resources you have, how much time, how much room, lots of ideas. Next. Just a little close up there. Next. And this is a very nice system. The material on the top is called hardware cloth, and it's actually wire. And it is about a quarter inch. And so that is to keep the rodents from getting in, and also lets the air in and water in if you, because you're going to want to keep your compost moist as it's going, but you may, if it's going to get too wet, you can cover it back up with something else. We'll talk more about that later. Next. And it shows how it opens up. Next. And this is, if you've got somebody with carpentry skills, well, I'm jealous, but yeah, so these are like kind of like those old Lincoln log things that we had when we were kids, and you can just slide them in and out to you can make a bigger bin or a smaller bin using that, or when you want to take the materials out, you can kind of dismantle it. Next. Here's just an old new looking galvanized garbage can, and it's got some holes punched in the top of the lid for letting air in and water in. And then if that is too unattractive, you can build this nice wooden frame around it. Next. Close up of the holes drilled in the top. Next. And here's some straw in there, probably layered on top. Next. Okay, you can use an old bathtub. If you're going to do worm composting, that's pretty good and nicely contained that way. And there's a wooden worm bin there on the right. Next. And here's a beautiful bench that doubles as a compost bin or a worm bin. And the seat comes up and you can have your compost just sitting right in there building. So that's kind of an attractive thing to have in your yard. Next. This is out at Grassroots Garden north of here in Eugene. They grow tons of food, wonderful vegetables for food for Lane County. And here's showing them doing large scale sheet or lasagna composting. And you can see they're putting down a layer of vegetable scraps from grocery stores there on the left, and that's a nitrogen rich material, and then layering with straw, which is a carbon rich material. Next. And here's that in situ composting I was talking about. It's simple, just dig a hole and bury your kitchen waste in the garden. And if you don't have very much, it's an option. Next. So what does compost do? Everybody, it kind of is one of those words where if you're not really, haven't done it before, but it's a good thing. You've just heard it's a good thing. Each handful contains millions of microorganisms, and it builds the soil structure, it retains and drains water, it aerates your soil, protects your plants from disease, and it cycles nutrients back into the soil, making them available for plants. A little goes a long way, and that's a handful of beautiful compost. Next. You can use compost as a soil amendment by mixing it. You can apply 2 inches or more to the top and then work it into the top 6 to 12 inches of your soil. That's one use for it. And next, you can, or if you're lazy or just certain applications, and maybe you just want to use it as a mulch, and it'll slowly percolate into the soil. And so you can do that, mulch or top dressing on your soil. You can even plant seeds in it. So those are things you can do with your compost that you make or compost that you buy. Next. Okay, you'll hear a lot more about compost in a few minutes as we do the demo for you. But so in summary, comparing and contrasting mulch versus compost, mulch is a raw single type of material, either organic or non-organic. It could be leaves, it could be rocks, it could, but it's a single thing that you're applying to your soil surface, only on the surface. It provides benefits over time and generally lasts longer depending on what the material is. Like I said, wood chips will last longer than leaves, for example. Compost, on the other hand, is a stable, very diverse, pH balanced, biologically alive soil amendment. You can use it as a mulch, or you can incorporate it into the soil. It provides an instant benefit, but it does get used up, and you'll need to apply it more often. Next. Okay, OSU Extension in Lane County, we do compost specialist training. We just concluded just last month, a few weeks ago. If you want to become a compost specialist, we also, the compost specialists, do free compost workshops around town. So look at the website and you can get some dates on those. There are various compost education sites around town. And if you don't live in Lane County, you can check with your own extension program and find out where you can learn more about composting. And we have worm bin classes also here in Lane County twice a year. And that shows one of the demos with one of our great compost specialists there, bent over a tarp and he's mixing stuff together. And so that's the kind of thing you'll learn in a compost demo. Next. There are lots of additional sources of information. Everybody uses the internet these days. I want to caution you to look for research-based information. You can usually find those if you put in .edu as part of your search and look for things that are coming out of the universities and extensions. And then you'll get more research-proven, non-testimonial, anecdotal type stuff. So I think that's it. And we are ready to do the demo. So it's just going to take like just a minute for us to set up. We're pretty quick. The hardest thing for me is to move this chair. It's a heavy chair.
Pretty good? Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope that while you're listening to Joanne's wonderful talk, that you can see the diverse bird population out here, which is a marvelous segue into Juliet's talk on bringing wildlife into your garden.
Yeah.
Just wonderful. So we are going to have a quick tabletop demonstration of what we call lasagna or sheet mulch composting, because it's layer upon layer of organic material, which we eventually will break down into this great planting medium for you. So again, pretend that you want to create a new garden area. You want to get rid of some grass, some lawn, or for some other purpose, if you have some terrible section that you want to tame, this is a great way to do it. And so first order of business, identify that site. If you want to grow some vegetables, you need to have at least 6 full hours of sunshine. Otherwise, you can create one of these anywhere in your yard. So the first thing we'll pretend this is a grassy area. So we've mowed it kind of short. And then the first thing to do is layer either cardboard. We have some big pieces of cardboard. You can get them at bicycle shops and furniture stores, things like that. They'd be more than happy probably for you to recycle some of their cardboard. So you lay that in your area. Or if you're lucky and still get newspapers, you can use that. And we will set these overlapping layers, maybe like 6 layers thick, something like that. And oops, okay. And we're covering all the grass so that none of it shows. Don't use any of the shiny inserts. Those aren't, they have maybe clay base or something like that in them, and you just don't want to use them. So after we've got this first layer down, we'll take the hose and water it all down. It'll keep the newspapers from flying away while you're working. And it also helps begin that process of helping say like the cardboard break down, because it's nice and wet. So this layer is a layer of carbon, supposedly. So cardboard, newspapers, that's carbon. So our next choice, we're going to put a layer of high nitrogen. So what shall we use today? Use some of this veg.
Yeah.
No, okay, we're going to use some kitchen veg. And so we're going to make a nice layer. And again, just pretend that this is, just keep piling it up so that it's, as high as you want it to go. Here we go. So cover, cover, cover.
Yeah, and we wanted to stress using, diverse material ingredients. So this is the stuff from my kitchen and
We'll just use them
house
all.
plants. Yeah, use them all.
We'll just use it all.
Coffee grounds in there. There's eggshells in there. There's but there's no meat or oil or bones or dairy products or anything like that.
Right. Okay. So there, pretend, it's that thick. So now we're going to use a layer of carbon. So what do I have? I have some fabulous leaves
Yeah.
from
These are
stash.
delivered from
These are from this.
from the
Okay.
city. These are
Okay,
the city
lovely.
leaves, and there's some pine needles in there, and
We get questions all the time about, can I use walnut leaves or can I use whatever? Yes, you
a worm
can.
on it.
What did you find?
A worm.
Oh, a worm. All right.
Oh.
Yes, you can use walnut leaves and, a number of other kinds of leaves. I think Jan will put in the chat a link to a Washington State Extension agent, Linda Chalker Scott, who has done a lot of studies on that. And so there is a link to a paper that she has written, or it's a publication anyway, to explain all that to you. And most of that information about you can't use walnut leaves is more anecdotal. There truly had not been any peer-reviewed studies about it. So there you go.
You can
So
use any kind of leaf.
right. So any kind of leaves. Got a segue there.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to do another nitrogen source. And with this, we're going to use some well-aged coffee grounds that we happen to get. If you go to a coffee kiosk or coffee shop, ask if you can have some of their coffee grounds. Maybe leave them a 5-gallon bucket and they'll fill it up for you. It's okay to use. Boy, this got
That one got a lot of filters.
Is that I think those are paper towels. I think. Well,
Yeah, sometimes you gotta.
yeah, but if they've got filters in them, that's just fine to use that.
Yeah.
As well. You don't have to be sifting or sorting out stuff other than the straws or whatever else
Yeah.
that might land in it. So, okay, here we go.
Looking good.
Looking good. All right, so we have another nice big layer of green or coffee grounds. So carbon is the next, and I've got shredded paper, and everybody's got that. We hope, right?
Actually, I
Yeah.
don't.
You don't?
No. We had a shredder, but it broke.
Well, right. Anyway, so here's a shredder. But the one thing, if you use shredded paper, I'm going to add some more coffee grounds and mix it up, because when this gets wet and it's in big, you've got a really thick layer, it can turn into paper mache, which is kind of a nuisance.
Yeah.
A little more. So anyway, you can kind of mix that up. Okay. As I said, this is a very quick demonstration, so it's not going to be as methodical as you will do it out in your own.
But again,
property.
it shows you what kinds of things you can use.
Right.
And check with the extension for a list of where you can get some of these materials. You probably have a lot of them already. Oh, next we have
A nice big layer of nitrogen. Boy, this is a great one.
yeah. We don't really have a lawn at our house, but we have a lot of grass that comes up everywhere because
That's beautiful.
every grass seed in the Willamette Valley lands up here. And so my husband actually did follow this down and raked it up.
So you don't want to use grass clippings that have had any weed and feed or anything like that on it. And we're hoping that maybe you even have a mulching blade, if you have a lawn at all, that it will clip those
This is not mulch.
the grass clippings and just return them back down into your lawn.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But this is fine.
yeah,
to use.
those are gorgeous. Okay, I'm gonna add what shall we do quickly here? Maybe a few more leaves.
Yeah.
Or, let's see, I'm trying to think what we want to,
Oh, well, you have some straw too, don't you?
we do. We have some straw. Happen to have a little bit. Want to toss that in here too?
Oh, here it is.
Yeah. Yeah, a great thing that I have used, so here's some straw, not hay, because we don't want any more seeds in there. Oh, and I have a little bit of sawdust that I have in here, or wood shavings that are in here. Okay, so that's a nice layer, remember. Thick is better, thicker is better. And let's see, one more layer of, let's do a coffee grounds and then we'll top it off.
Okay.
Okay,
So this looks good.
it looks like a great one. Let's see, is there something else I was going to say about the, oh, I know, when you, right now when all of your daffodils and tulips and things are starting to they've lived their life and they're
Yeah.
starting to turn yellow, although it may take quite a while before you're able to get that, clip the foliage, but may not be for a couple more months, but that's a great thing. I have a lot of those, so when it's time, I gather all that stuff up and put it in a big Rubbermaid garbage can and keep it. And it's wonderful as mulch. So it's real dry kind of stuff. So I can add that to my compost, like lasagna things, or use it directly as a mulch in the garden. Okay, so this was our top layer of nitrogen. So when you are, when you've had a big pile, the top layer is always going to be carbon. In this case, we're going to put some more leaves on. And that kind of tidies everything up. There we go. And then what I've got here, what you can use are burlap bags, like coffee bags that you can get from coffee roasters. Just call around here in Eugene. There is one particular coffee roaster, in fact, that has bags and they will sell them to you for $1 or $2. And but in your own community, see what you happen to have. So that tidies it up. And especially if you add this at the top, it'll allow for the rain to penetrate, but it'll keep things from blowing away, perhaps keep critters from getting in, maybe not. If you do happen to have, maybe like dogs that like to get into things, or raccoons, or who knows what, maybe not using kitchen veg or anything in there that might attract them. The best time of year to start a lasagna bed is in the fall. That way it'll be breaking down fall and winter, and then come spring, it should be pretty good, ready to plant things in, at least starts. It may not look like it's ready for seeds, but it might be. And I have done this in the spring, and then I kind of cheated and put a top layer of a planting mix, just a very thin layer to cover it all up. And then I actually planted some perennials and a tree and all kinds of things, but I had to kind of dig down and cut out the cardboard and plant it in there. But it actually, all these years later, it's turned into just a really wonderful ornamental bed, not vegetable, ornamental bed. So did I forget anything? This was
I don't
pretty
think so.
quick.
It was pretty quick and dirty, but it's
Quick
great.
and
I
dirty.
think we got that.
So do we have any questions?
Okay, let me look here. One person did ask about how to keep skunks, etc., from getting into the lasagna. I find that they love the kitchen scraps. So you kind of have answered that. So
Okay,
Yeah, probably stick with the grass clippings and coffee grounds. I don't think they'd be attracted to that
Probably
for
not.
your nitrogen source, and just
Yeah.
leave the kitchen stuff out of there.
and we didn't say that, we said not to put meat or oil or bones or what we didn't say, dairy,
Yeah.
but we didn't say don't put pet waste in there either, dog or cat. A lot of pathogens and things in those. So
we have one other question here. Be sure if you have questions to type them into your into the Q&A. So the other question is, would you speak to the use of weed inhibiting fabric and its effect on soil health?
oh, say that
Like the geotextiles.
yes,
Yeah, weed inhibiting fabric. Which,
right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're going to get some, more compaction that way with than you would if you had like a living mulch on there. Certain creatures aren't going to be able to get in and out that are good for, like worms aren't going to climb in and out and aerate your soil and that kind of stuff. So I would say that use it in places where you really don't want things to grow.
Right, like
Yeah.
underneath a path.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Right, because there won't be or might not be as much air and water penetration between the to the soil
Yeah.
if you're covering it
Yeah.
with a geotextile.
Yeah. More,
Yeah.
it's better than if you were to use plastic.
Oh, right,
but
right.
but still it's not as good as like a living mulch.
And it's not really going to be a weed inhibitor.
It's true. I mean,
Yeah.
it does break down too.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and I mean, I have,
Weeds blow in,
and then they'll grow,
the air, and
on
they'll grow
top
in
of
this-
it.
they will be growing on the top of this, of our lasagna bed. Yeah, they'll be easier to
Yeah.
pull out, but yeah, they don't really grow from underneath. I mean, they can, but, and they will, but it's no guarantee that if you use that they actually will be prohibiting weeds from growing in your garden.
Yeah.
So somebody asked about the burlap bags. You did say coffee places. Is there any place else that you can get those?
That I'm not sure. I found some at St. Vincent de Paul once. You never know what you'll find there. And that was in their crafts and fabric section. But
Yeah, we found somewhere a roll of burlap fabric. I can't remember where it was. My husband finds all kinds of
like a
things.
ring or someplace like
Yeah,
that.
something like that. Big, just a roll of it. And so that was kind of nice because then you could, cut it to size. But this breaks down after, season or two also.
Right.
Okay. So this person says the people who lived on their property several years ago put plastic down everywhere. I have dug up a lot of it. Is there some trick to make this easier?
I don't think so. I've had that experience too on parts of our property. I think every time I dig around in the areas. I just pull out as much as I can. But no, I don't think there's any miracle.
No, plastic is a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
people really need to think about their use of plastic and everything. You know?
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm sorry about that, but yeah, it's not. You gotta just every time you're in your yard, just
Yeah.
pick it up.
That's right.
Okay, that's all.
It
The
doesn't
questions.
reproduce.
Okay, that's all the questions that I've seen. So thanks a lot, guys. That was great information and a great demo.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so we're excited to hear Juliet talk about wildlife in your garden, and that's one big reason why I garden is to make it good for the wildlife. And I have a lot of birds here that just really add a lot to my life.
Yes, we could hear them. It was
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Okay.
it was a really nice setting for your compost.
Thank you.
Beautiful. So, well, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we'll get ready for Juliet to do her talk. So give us a few minutes to let her get set up. I got so cold. I started shaking. Okay, Juliet, do you want to share your screen?
Let's see.
Need to see if we can bring up your presentation. Okay, that looks good.
Can you see it?
Yes, that looks good.
Excellent.
Okay, so before we get started, I'll do a little introduction for Juliet here. So our last session for this webinar is on sustainable landscape for wildlife. Juliet moved to Eugene, Oregon in September of 2012 and became a master gardener in April of 2013. Her yard, about a quarter-acre suburban lot, is filled with trees, shrubs, and lots of flowers. She has dwarf apple, pear, and plum trees, blueberry shrubs, lots of perennials, and 4 raised beds for vegetables. Year-round, she loves watching the many birds and pollinators which visit her yard. Juliet will talk about how you can create your own sustainable landscape for wildlife by planting native plants, creating pollinator habitats, as well as following other important practices. I'm pleased to introduce Juliet Bender.
Thank you, Jan, for that presentation. And I'm glad to be here tonight. I wish I could see all of you, but unfortunately that's not the way it is. I don't have quite the grand backdrop that Joanne and Catherine had, but you'll have to look at my gorgeous pictures instead on my PowerPoint. So tonight we're going to be talking about sustainable landscapes for wildlife. So what does that mean? What is sustainable landscapes for wildlife? It basically means that we practice good stewardship, good environmental stewardship, and that we live in harmony and in tandem with wildlife. And I'm going to talk to you about how we can do that in in our suburban lots. We don't have to have acres and acres in order to live with wildlife. So biodiversity, we want to protect that, and it is very important that we do that. And landscapes that have a broad range of plant materials, and we'll talk about that throughout my speech, will attract a lot of different insects, a lot of birds, and it will help to ensure that we have robust and resilient ecosystems, even in our own little lots that we have in suburban landscapes. So you can see a lot of these pictures here of dragonflies, ladybugs, all of these bees that you can attract to your individual yard just by knowing a few key principles about what to grow and what to have in your yard. This is a great quote by Douglas Ptolemy. He wrote a wonderful book called Bringing Nature Home: How You Can Sustain Wildlife with Native Plants. And this is a quote from him. And let me just read it. For the first time in its history, gardening has taken on a role that transcends the need of the gardener. Like it or not, gardeners have become important players in the management of the nation's wildlife. And it is very true that we cannot just rely on wildlife refuges, on national parks, but we as people that live, inhabitants of this earth, have to take care in our own little acre or half acre or quarter acre, taking care of the wildlife that lives in our vicinity. I'm sure many of you have seen this web of life. It's just very important to know that all living things depend on living and non-living matter to survive, for food, for shelter, and it all begins here at the bottom with the healthy soil. And you were hearing about how to improve your soil with compost just before this, with soil and with plants that will help to feed all of these various creatures above in this web of life. So what is happening in a lot of our areas is basically a loss of habitat. We're seeing a lot of urban development in areas where there had never been urban development before. That's obviously causing forests to, trees to be toppled, grasslands to disappear. So we're seeing a lot of changes to habitat. We're also seeing invasive species that are overpowering some of our natives. And that is starting to be a problem, or continuing to be a problem. And of course, climate change. We hear a lot of talk about climate change and how that is changing our temperatures and changing the weather. And all of these things cause a decline in our pollinator populations. And we are seeing that certainly over the last number of years. For example, the population of North American birds has dropped nearly 30% since 1970. That was a study done by Cornell University. And since 1990, nearly 1 billion monarch butterflies have died, basically because of loss of habitat and pesticide use. So we're seeing with the urban development, with invasive species such as ivy and Scotch broom are taking over places that used to have lots of wildlife. So loss of habitat is critical. Also, lawns. A lot of us have large expanses of lawn, but is this the way we really want to have our property, because this is really a monoculture that is limited support for insects and pollinators. You really don't have anything here that a pollinator can use to have nectar or host plants. It's basically a monoculture. So we want to think about other ways of doing things and what might be better and why than just having the perfect lawn. So tonight we're going to talk about how to change your yard into a miniature wildlife refuge. And I'm going to talk about each of these ways that you can do it and give you some examples and ideas as to how you might have that miniature wildlife refuge in your own backyard by planting native plants, by creating pollinator habitats, by providing water sources, by providing nesting materials, having food for pollinators for both summer and winter. Winter is especially critical for some of these populations, and also to think about reducing and eliminating pesticide use. So we will talk in more detail about each of these. But the goals are to think about how you might add more natives into your yard, to think about removing any invasives that you have, and observe what works and enhance what you already have. You don't have to do this all at once. It can be done over a period of time, years basically, especially if you're planting a wide variety of pollinator plants. But a lot of what you have in your yard might work, and you just might need to tweak a few things. So you just need to think about what you have and what you might want to change, and then make a plan as to how you can add to create that pollinator habitat. So all of us have different types of gardens. Some of us have more shade gardens because we have a lot of trees around our property. Some of us may have more woodland properties, or maybe we have a lot of natives. But we can work with all of these in order to create a sustainable landscape for wildlife in our own backyards. So this is a slide just to show you some easy ideas as to how to add things to your yard, such as here's a birdhouse, or bird feeders, or a hummingbird feeder, a water source, some plantings, diverse types of plantings. Here's a bat box, a bat house, something you can add. And this is just to let you know that cats can be a problem outside. So keeping a cat inside is probably a good idea if you want to have a yard that has a lot of wildlife in it. And also this shows you just things that you can put on your window so that birds do not fly into your window. So these are just easy things that you can do to start thinking about creating a landscape, sustainable landscape for wildlife. So as I mentioned, removing invasive plants is really critical, such as ivy that will, as you see, grows up trees, which you certainly don't want to have done. This is purple loose shrift, which can really get out of control in an area, and Scotch broom, which we probably have all seen going across the hillsides here, even in the Eugene area. Lots of Scotch broom. So these are all invasives that you really do not want in your yard or area. And by getting rid of some of these invasives, you will be able to create more space for diversity. And that is the key, is diversity. And then you can replace those invasive plants with habitat-friendly plants. that will be much better for your yard. So one of the things you need to think about are the insects that you have, and which are good insects and which ones may not be so good. And I've listed some of the good insects here. The ladybird beetle or the ladybug beetle, which we all recognize here in this lower picture. All of our many native bees, and we'll be talking more about them in a little bit. The green lacewings, there's a picture right here of a green lacewing. Butterflies, dragonflies, they're very good insects as well, and damsel bugs. What's so good about the ladybugs as well as the green lacewings is that both of them eat aphids, which you can find especially if you're growing vegetables, you can find aphids, and these are really good beneficial insects to have to help control some of those insects that you may not want. And know what all the pollinators are. There are many different types of pollinators. We're all familiar with butterflies and hummingbirds and bees, but moths can also be pollinators, flies, beetles, bats, they can all be pollinators. So know all the different types of pollinators and welcome them into your yard, because they are all serving a purpose in your yard. So there are basically three elements that you need in order to sustain wildlife in your yard. One is to have shelter and habitat for that wildlife, and we'll talk more about that. To have food both in the summer and the winter, and also to have water sources. Retaining native habitat, that is pretty important because a lot of our bees, our native bees, 70% actually of Oregon's bees live in the ground. So you can see in this picture down here, bees will live in holes underground. Many of our Oregon bees do. So you want to keep some open soil so that bees can come and go out of the soil, because that is a critical habitat for native bees in our area. By having layering also, like in this garden here, where you have trees, you have shrubs, you have various layers. That also is very good to attract wildlife into your yard. Also, dead branches or snags. You can see some snags here in this picture. Birds will use these for homes, as you can see here, that they will create cavities in those dead trees to live in. So it's really important to keep some of these things in your yard. We actually lost one of our Douglas firs in our yard, so we created a snag out of it. And we're hoping that someone will move into it. It's fairly new, it's only a year or so old, but we're hoping that we will get some wildlife to live in it. Minimal fall cleanup is also important, because a lot of the insects that you have in your yard might be living in some of that plant matter. So don't be too quick to clean your yards in the fall, and leave some of that over the winter so that these insects can live in your yards during that time period. Also creating nesting opportunities and materials. Evergreens are critical places for wildlife. So having some sort of evergreen layer in your yard is important. Layering, as I mentioned before, like in this garden is important, or having cavities like in this mason bee house for mason bees to live in so that they have a habitat for the time when they're in your yard. Or keeping, as I said, grasses available in the wintertime so that insects can live in that area during the winter months when maybe places are hard for insects to find or for food for the insects. A year-round water source is important as well here, and you want to have it pretty shallow. And it's good to have, like in this picture down below, a rock or something in it. So dragonflies or bees or birds can perch on there and drink the water. So you don't want it to be too deep for the insects so that they can perch on the rock or on the side or somewhere around the water source. And you want it again to be year round. So even in the wintertime, you would want to have some water out there. Maybe some sort of small fountain in our front yard. We have a small fountain that runs year round. And it's nice to see the deer or hummingbirds or other birds come there and drink water out of it year round. So it's nice to have a source like that. And you want to provide food for all types of wildlife, even the deer, as you can see in this picture up above here. I have some plants in my front yard that I leave for the deer to eat. Certainly not everything, but there are some things that I have in my front yard. My backyard is fenced, so they can't get into that, but the deer do have to eat, especially in the summertime. Their food sources are less, so they will come into neighborhoods to eat. And the birds, obviously the young, it's critical for them to have food sources year round. And you want to have food for specific insects as well. You want to have, these are of course for the monarch butterfly, and milkweed is considered to be one of the most important food sources and hosts for the monarch butterfly. This is the larval stage for the monarch caterpillar. And then you can see the adult monarch butterfly down here below. My husband and I had a chance a number of years ago when we were in Mexico to go to a site where all these monarch butterflies nest over the winter down there. And it was amazing to see millions, it seemed like, of butterflies just nesting. And when we got there, it was early in the morning and they were still just hanging on to the trees and the leaves. And then as the weather warmed, all of a sudden they started flying. And it was just an amazing sight to see thousands and thousands of monarch butterflies just flying through the air. So if you have a chance, go down to Mexico and see that amazing phenomenon. We also want to create habitats for future generations of wildlife. One of the things I mentioned was that a lot of our bird populations are declining, and it's critical that birds need to fledge 2 to 3 generations in one season in order for them to increase their populations. So that means that they need a lot of food source during that summer month when all these birds are hatching. So it's important that birds can hatch And then the birds will leave the nest, and then they can have more eggs so they can leave the nest again. So the food sources is what makes having 2 to 3 generations in one summer happen. So you'll want to make sure that you have the food in your yard to sustain those hungry mouths, as you see in this picture up above, so that we can help increase the bird populations that are starting to decline across the country. But it's not only birds, it's ladybugs we want to, create food for, bumblebees, etc. So let me walk through a few principles here that you can do in order to create a pollinator habitat in your own backyard. One of the first element is to plant a diversity of flowers, shapes, and species. And what I mean by that is flower shapes, as planting tubular flowers or flat flowers like these daisies. So have a wide diversity of shapes in your yard of flowers. And we'll talk about why that's important to various insects later on. And a large variety of flower species. And you can see in this lower picture how many different types of flowers you have in a fairly small area. That will attract the pollinators to your yard. And you also want to ensure that you have continuous flowering from early spring to fall. So think about when you're planting things, what will flower in the spring, what will flower in the summer, and what might flower in the fall. Because there are certain perennials that will flower in each of those seasons, and do some research about that. So you will have a continuous flowering of plants in your yard throughout the season, so that pollinators will have enough food to stay in your yard throughout that whole time period. And think about including some natives. They don't all have to be natives. You can have some non-natives as well, but include some natives in your yard. And we'll talk about what some of those can be. Plant single flowered varieties. That's important because I think we all are familiar with these double flowers. Single flowers are more like this, where you have a source of nectar in the middle. If you have double flowers, those flowers where basically all of this area is taken up by petals, they can be sterile and have no pollen in them. So they're no benefit to pollinators. So you really need to think about having single flowered varieties, planting those in your yard, because they are more important for the pollinators. Plant larger blocks of pollinator flowers, like this picture right here, and include some bulbs and shrubs and trees as well in there. Things that are closer to natives will increase, native plants will increase the pollinator visits. So that's why I mentioned to include some natives in your yard. But diversity is key. So the more variety of plants you have, the better. A couple more principles. Extend the bloom time by deadheading your flowers. So as you see in this lower picture here, if you deadhead some of these dead flowers here, you will actually add to the extent of time that plant will flower. So it takes a little bit of effort, but I actually enjoy deadheading my flowers, and it will extend the time period that particular plant will flower. So if you leave these on, it will start to set seed, and you would prefer not to do that while the plant is still flowering. And create nesting opportunities for bees. like cavities, as we talked about for mason bees, bare soil, hollow twigs, all of those are important for bees so that they have a nesting area in your yard. And if you are managing bees, and I know some people out there do, just make sure you get trained and how to control the diseases that might impact your bee boxes so that you do not get diseases in your set of bees. And finally, eliminate or reduce the amount of pesticide use that you have, that you use in your yard. You can also use annuals. Annuals will also provide nectar. So that's another source that you can plant to take you a little bit of extra time to get perennials in. So you could put some annuals in the places of perennials. So let's talk about some examples of some of the nectar plants for butterflies. In North America, there are 700 species of butterflies. And here in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest, we have 20 species of butterflies. This picture here is the Western tiger swallowtail. This one is the painted lady, and down below here is the red admiral. So all of these have different areas or different plants that they are interested in getting nectar from. But this list here are ones that most butterflies will like. And the type of flowers that butterflies particularly like are large, showy, pink, orange, purple generally, and they're flat, like this one here, like it has a landing pad as we describe it, so that the butterfly can land on the top of the flower. That's one that they really like, or down below, or else the stacked ones like this one, which is the lilac. Those are some of the types of flowers that they like. They also like fragrant flowers, the butterflies do. So anything that's sweetly scented, they will be attracted to. So the lilacs particularly would be something that they would really, really like. But penstemons, agastache, goldenrod, daisies, asters, milkweed, of course, for the monarchs. Those are all plants that you can plant in your yard that will attract butterflies, because they will be coming to your yard for the nectar that those plants have. The painted lady, for example, is particularly attracted to coneflowers and asters and zinnias. And the Western tiger swallowtail is attracted to the lilac, as you can see here, and lavender. So just pick some examples of some of these and plant them in your yard and see what comes to your yard. Every year I enjoy looking to see which butterflies will arrive in my yard, because they're so wonderful to watch. Hummingbirds, I think we all love to watch hummingbirds. And these are some nectar plants for hummingbirds. Now for hummingbirds, there are 340 species of hummingbirds in the world. And here in Oregon, we have 5 different species of hummingbirds, and really only 2 that are in our area. There's one that's in the coastal area, which is the Allen's hummingbird. Here in Western Oregon, we have the Anna's hummingbird. And we also, one of the hummingbirds that's all over Oregon is called the Rufous hummingbird. So the Annas and the Rufous are ones that we will see here most commonly in the Eugene area. But Eastern Oregon also has the black chinned hummingbird. But these are some of the flowers that you can plant in your yard for Pacific Northwest hummingbirds that will attract them. I know in my yard, I have a crocosmia, and they just love. That's this flower right here. And you can see the hummingbird's beak just going deep into that tubular flower. And that is the type of flower that they really like are colorful flowers with long tubes, like here or up here. These both have long tubes of flowers that they can put their long beak into to get the nectar. Red flowers, they seem to be attracted to, but not only red. But these are some examples: columbine, crocosmia, bleeding heart, coral bells, cardinal flower, penstemon, fuchsias, and the red flowering currant, which are flowering right now in my yard. And I just saw a number of hummingbirds on there earlier today on my red flowering currants. They are all good species to plant in your yard to attract hummingbirds. Now let's talk a little bit about bees. In Oregon, we have a huge variety of bees. There are actually over 800 species of bees, native bees in Oregon. The honeybee is actually not native to Oregon. It's native to Europe. So it's an introduced species here. But our native bees are ones that we've seen some declines in the population due to loss of habitat and also increase in pesticide use. So these are some of the plants that you can plant in your yard to attract some of our native bees, such as the bumblebees or the mason bees or the sweat bees or the carpenter bees. There are so many different varieties of bees. I have in my yard, I have ceanothus. I have several large ceanothus in my yard. And when they're blooming, the bees are just covering those shrubs. One day I remember standing there trying to count how many different types of bees I saw there. Because there was a wide variety. It wasn't just a bumblebee or it wasn't just a mason bee, but all sizes, shapes of bees. So again, plant some of these in your yard. Russian sage is a great one. The Oregon grape, goldenrods, the stone crops, the sedums will also attract bees. Lupins, those will be ripening soon in my yard, the lupins. So those are all plants that you can plant. And bees are generally, they say they're attracted to yellow or blue-violet, blue or lavender flowers, but and I guess a lot of these actually are those colors. A lot of them are yellow and purple. The ceanothus is blue, so they do seem to be attracted more to yellows, blues, and lavenders. But we want to try and keep our native bees here in Oregon. So plant some of these to attract them to your yard. And as I said, use of pesticides has been a problem in causing many of our native bee populations, bird populations to decline. So we want to think about minimizing the use of pesticides in our yards because pollinators can be very susceptible to pesticides. And if we need to, want to make sure that we follow the instructions on the label when we're using them. Make sure you read thoroughly and completely the directions before you start spraying. And try not to spray widely, but to spray on a particular source that you want to get rid of, but definitely minimize the use of pesticides in your yard, because they can get into the food and water of these pollinators. And you remember the picture of those birds with their hungry mouths. That food that's been sprayed by pesticides can get into their mouths, and we certainly don't want that to happen. So beyond flowers, there are other things that you can think about to put in your yard. Fruit trees are one source. There are pictures here of Oregon crab apples or madrone. In my yard, I have apple trees, and they're just about ready. The flowers are just about ready to open. And I also have plum and a pear tree as well. So those are all good sources for birds as well, are fruit trees. And berries, of course. These are some sorts of berries that you can put in your yard. The Oregon grape is a native that you can plant in your yard. Viburnums also have berries, and they support caterpillars and pollinators. Blueberries as well. Those are all good sources for various wildlife. I know when our blueberries get ripe, it's hard to keep the birds away, so we share our crop with the birds. I think they get half and we get half. We tried to net them one year, but when I went out there once, I found a bird trapped inside the netting. So after that, I decided not to do that and just to share it with the birds. So I'm fine with that. They need their food sources too. Nuts are another example. Some of these trees are pretty big to plant in a yard, but you may have a larger property where you can plant Oregon white oaks or hazelnuts or black cherries for the acorns. So those are all good sources too for birds and wildlife, so that they can eat the acorns from those trees. And seeds. After all of these flowers have gone to seed at the end of the time when they're no longer producing flowers, let them go to seed at that point. And then the birds will love eating those seeds. Usually I have rudbeckia. I have fairly large area of my yard that has rudbeckias in them. And I let those go to seed, and I can see the birds just eating those seeds. So I let them stay up for the fall into the winter so that the birds can eat some of those seeds. And these are other examples of plants that you can leave up, and Oregon sunshine. This is goldenrod, some aster here. All of those are good for seeds. So leave those up in the winter as a food source for the birds. So if you will follow all the steps that I've talked about, you should have success in bringing wildlife into your yard. As you can see here in the pictures, the hummingbirds, the butterflies, and the bees You should be able to attract all of them into your yard by following some of those steps, by creating some of those principles for a pollinator habitat, for creating a pollinator habitat. And there are some human benefits as well by creating drought resistance. A lot of our native plants are drought tolerant. We can conserve water by minimizing the use of pesticides. We can reduce the costs because we don't have to buy all those chemicals. We can reduce maintenance time, perhaps by not eliminating everything all at once at the end of the season, but by leaving some of that up, the plants up during those winter months. And children will love coming to your yard to see all the wildlife that you're attracting, the butterflies, the frogs, perhaps, the hummingbirds, and they will all provide a natural beauty that you will love to see and cherish as you walk out into your yard. And once you've started attracting wildlife to your own yard, you can share that experience with your neighbors, because actually by building larger swaths of pollinator-friendly landscapes, you will probably bring in more wildlife, because the birds and the pollinators, when they see that color and a large diversity of color and plants below them, that will attract them. So by connecting with your neighbors and having them grow similar plants or other plants, that will increase actually the amount of pollinators and wildlife that you will get into your yards. So here are some publications. These are some that I used in this talk. And I think some of these will go up onto the in the chat, but these are all great OSU Extension publications that just by putting in the number in that link up above, the catalog extension Oregon State, you can pull up these publications. And in, for example, attract hummingbirds to your garden, it will give you very specific plants and characteristics of plants that hummingbirds like, and the same with the butterflies. It will give you butterfly species and when they're active, and then which type of plants are host plants and nectar plants. So I've only included a few of them in my talk, but there are many more that you can look at in some of these publications. So I encourage you to add, to write these numbers down or look at the links and look further into some of this research. And if you're interested in the bees, this Nurturing Mason Bees is a great resource as well. This first one, in enhancing urban and suburban landscapes to protect pollinators, this has the 10 principles of creating pollinator habitats to your yard. So if you're interested in that, it lays it all out there very succinctly and gives you lots of examples as well of those 10 principles, plus a lot of other information as well. So I think that's my last slide. This is our Master Gardener Extension hotline, and I'll leave the second slide, I guess, up so people can write down those numbers if they didn't get them. But I guess we're open for questions. Should I leave this up, or should I stop share?
You can leave it up for a while. I think that might be nice that people can write some of those down. So if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box. I apologize because apparently I cut off the questioning a little early for the last group, but maybe you can answer it, Juliet, or if Catherine or Joanna are still on, maybe they can help out. Is there a best strategy for filling a raised bed? Do you know, or is Catherine?
Oh, for filling a raised bed with soil?
Yeah, we're here though.
Okay. Do
We could
you want to take that?
Okay. Oh, we're going to put our video on so we won't be disembodied.
Can you see us? No.
Yeah.
No. Yes. Oh, okay.
Oh, we can't see ourselves.
Yeah. For filling a raised bed, actually, I rebuilt all of my raised beds this year. And I reused, of course, some of what was already in there. But I did get some planting medium from Lane Forest Products delivered, which was very dear because living in Cottage Grove, they have a $60 delivery
Oh, my.
fee.
Oh.
So yeah, anyway, we did that, but I also had quite a bit of compost that I could put in there. And so that's generally what I add in there rather than maybe maybe if you have access to some of your soil that you have around, but anyway, if that answered it somewhat of your question.
Great, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, Julia, here's some questions for you.
Okay.
Can bees use the holes made by voles, or do they just get routed from their burrows?
I would think not. I would think that they need very tiny little holes that they would use and that they create themselves. So that's why I suggested leaving open those bare soil so that they can create those holes themselves in the ground.
Great, thank you. Do the flowers you mentioned require full sun? Do they require good soil? And what about pH?
Many of them do, but not all of them. For example, coral bells, I know I mentioned that you can do in shade. But a lot of the ones I mentioned, the Agastaki can be part shade. So that one is part shade. Thinking if there are others that might, well, bleeding heart, certainly that's a shade one as well. But many of them do, certainly the coneflowers, the echinacea, the yarrow, Russian sage, those all are pretty much full sun. And as far as soil, I mean, I have clay soil here and I grow all of those in clay soil. So they will survive in pretty much anything, any type of soil.
Okay. What about snakes, amphibians, and other types of wildlife?
Well, amphibians, I guess you would need to have some sort of a water source for them. So that's why having a water source is key. I know our next door neighbors actually have a small stream going through their property, and the frogs are just amazing in certain months. You can hear them chirping all the time. And as far as, I mean, I see garter snakes in my yard. And so, yeah, they're certainly attracted to insects that you will find that will be in your yard. They will be attracted to those.
Okay, that's all the questions I have so far. We'll give people a couple more seconds and I'll mention that to please fill out the evaluation for this class. The link to it is in the chat, and also Jet put in the chat all the links to the publications that Juliet mentioned. So if you look in there, you'll find the links to them. So, well, looks like we're done with questions for the evening. Thank you very much, Juliet, and to both Joanne and Catherine for their great presentations tonight. There are a lot of thank yous and great presentation notations in the chat. So thought you'd like to know that. And thank you to everyone who attended the Sustainable Landscaping webinar tonight and on the last 2 Mondays that we've had this class. We hope you learned from and enjoyed each of the sessions. Let me look one more time here. Yep, just another thanks in the Q&A. So have a great evening, everyone. Thanks.